I'm curious about food prices and what you get for your money because we don't have x-ray vision to know what's inside food, and we don't know really how those food attributes, vitamins, minerals, but also many other attributes of foods, aspects of food, influence our health. So I'm William Masters. I'm a professor of economics about food at the Friedman School of Nutrition at Tufts University.
Can you tell me more about what you do and your role at Tufts?
As an economist, I teach the basic principles of how to think about how people respond to incentives, what's physically possible to do, the technology and opportunities around us, and the policies, the choices that are made by organizations or the government. To understand the economics is to understand how people respond to these changes. And I do that specifically about agriculture, food, nutrition. So with a former PhD student, now teaching at Allegheny College in Pennsylvania, we have a textbook called Food Economics. The subtitle is Agriculture, Nutrition, and Health, because we connect those dots.
And you recently had a study in Nature Food, and if you could tell me more about that.
So Nature Food is a journal that was created by Nature, one of the main general science publishers, to have a range of studies that we have been able to publish there, a variety of things. I think you're talking about matching food composition within food groups, so vegetables, fruits, and so forth, to their nutritional value. That's part of our Food Prices for Nutrition project. It's funded by the Gates Foundation and the UK government to try to understand how food prices relate to nutrition. And we also matched to environmental consequences of how foods are produced, and found some pretty striking results. The core of this Food Prices for Nutrition project is to match the prices of items to what's actually inside the food. So we, of course, don't have X-ray vision to know somehow magically the vitamins, minerals, other nutrients that are in foods and the risk factors that they pose for our health. Even if we did know it was in food, we wouldn't know how it matches up to nutritional requirements. So what this project does, and what this paper did, this study, was to identify, first of all, what prices are for items sold all around the world, and match those item descriptions to what's known about the actual composition of the food, and then match that composition to the nutritional value as scored by epidemiologists relative to the health risks that are posed based on everything else people are eating on average. Having a little bit more of this or that might help people limit cardiovascular disease, limit the risk of unwanted weight gain, limit the risk of diabetes, limit the risk of hypertension and some kidney disease, some cancers, all the risk factors. So we matched that. And then we also matched to what's known about the carbon equivalent emissions. So that could be methane or land use change that releases carbon to the atmosphere, and also water use.
Are the costs of food related to the emissions of the foods?
It turns out that prices are really closely related to how much emission there is. Again, that's carbon equivalent emissions, either methane, which comes from cows, and other ruminant animals that have bacteria in their gut that release the methane, or rice paddies that have bacteria in underwater that releases methane. So we also are interested in the land use change emissions, and then also fossil fuel use along the supply chain. And researchers have studied a lot how the different kinds of food production cause emissions of all those types. And it turns out that within any food group with roughly similar contribution to your daily diet, choosing the least expensive options is consistently less emitting. Choosing the least expensive option uses less of all those resources that cause climate change, that cause the global warming and the increased severity of storms. That is caused by these activities that release either carbon or methane into the air. Least expensive items, you're choosing the things that are produced most efficiently with the least resources. And what that means is they have less emissions. This is not just buying what's on sale, which is important because that happens to be what's a little bit left over, and so it uses less emissions. But it's also the things that are done most efficiently. So for example, in dairy, if you can get to a level of dairy production where, as in America, typically every cow is milked 3 times a day, The cow is lactating, producing milk most of her life. Um, I've done milking of cows. And when you can increase the amount of milk you get per cow, and especially per day of the cow's life, you dramatically reduce methane emissions from milk. So by far the most least emitting kind of dairy is the least expensive kind of dairy. But the same applies to chicken, the same applies to across the spectrum of foods, because it just takes less land, it takes less effort, and that effort is what's reflected in the price.
Okay, so now what about looking at then the nutritional value of the costs of those foods that are the least, let's say, emitting?
So it turns out that prices of food are very poorly correlated with the nutritional value that's in those foods. There just isn't much relationship. That's because many healthy things are inexpensive, they're already in the food. Other things might be important for health, but it takes some cost to add them in. But most of the value of food, the price that you have to pay, is just unrelated to nutrition. It has to do with convenience and packaging and all the marketing expense, not just fancy Super Bowl ads for food, but billboards and all of the radio, television, online advertisements for food that we see every day, plus the built-in marketing in the supermarket or fast food restaurants and so forth. Obviously, that's a huge expense. And then there's differences in packaging, processing, all of the services associated with food. So that's most of the difference in price. And it doesn't have much relation to the nutritional value of food within every broad food group. So within dairy, within all animal source foods, for example, within all vegetables, within all fruit, within all types of oils, there's really no correlation between price and nutritional value, the same way there is a clear correlation between price and sustainability or emissions.
I think part of your paper, if I'm correct, had also to do with the fact that you can eat healthy and not spend a lot of money. And maybe, I guess, therefore, what you're saying at the same time, emit less carbon or other emissions based on your consumption.
It is absolutely possible to
Okay.
eat a very healthy diet on a very limited budget. And in so doing, one will naturally reduce one's carbon footprint for methane and other greenhouse gases by choosing the least expensive options. The challenge to doing that, to eating at a low cost, an overall healthy diet, is it takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of effort. You have to close your ears, close your eyes, not pay any attention to the marketing, not listen to every single message just telling you what's healthy, and just follow the scientific consensus of nutritionists, building on thousands of years of trial and error, and then hundreds of years of experimenting and understanding of what is healthy. So following that general advice. Um, and then having, to get the lowest cost, having a lot of planning, relatively speaking, compared to what most people can do, and a fair amount of time in cooking. So you need to make a shopping list, for that 15 to 20 basic staples in your kitchen. You need to have a repertoire of, 5 to 10, 12 dishes that you typically make, rotate between them, buy, relatively large packages of every one of those staples. And the challenge is in doing that is partly the planning and the actual cooking, which of course takes time, um, but also really resisting. And how are you supposed to resist the temptation of something that is so tasty, so delicious, it's right there and convenient, and it's what's fun. It's what's heavily advertised. It's what your kids will ask for. It's what your family will want. It's what will be crowd pleasing. And so it's extremely hard to maintain that healthy diet at a low cost that we know is possible, but is really hard to do. So often it's only people in relatively privileged positions who are able to do that.
Could you give me an idea of maybe what a plate or a dinner plate would look like that is inexpensive and nutritional and therefore also climate friendly?
So you'd walk into the store, and you'd go around and grab generic frozen vegetables. You'd get cheap generic pasta, whole wheat pasta. Doesn't taste quite as good as, but if you can get whole wheat pasta, that'd be good. You can get brown rice um, for whole grains. You can get apples, bananas, often oranges at very low cost. You would take a low cost bottle of oil, um, and you would add peanut butter and some whole wheat bread, and or a can of garbanzo beans. You would want the low cost dairy options, a block of regular cheese. You'd want tinned sardines, tinned fish, tuna, that sort of thing. And you walk out of the store with the basics for a very wide range of dishes that are the traditional foods people have been eating for years. Um, and your kids would say, "Is that what's for dinner again?" And your family might say, honey, this is not quite what I had hoped we could afford. I see all this stuff on TV, like my Instagram feed is full of fun stuff. I don't understand why we're eating the same boring things night after night, and day after day. And that's the problem we face.
What are the huge offenders of foods in terms of emissions?
So it turns out that as innovation has proceeded in producing food with fewer resources, one type of food that we still produce in a way that would be utterly recognizable to a 19th century person and hasn't improved in productivity all that much. It is a ruminant that has this problem of bacteria in the gut that allows it to digest grass and so forth, but does produce methane, and that's beef. So beef is by far, per calorie of food, per unit of pleasure of a person, the worst offender in terms of climate change, partly because of the life of the animal itself, but also the feed that's grown for it. So whether the animal is grazing and living for a long time with pasture, or being fed on concentrated rations of corn and soybeans, um, emissions per unit of food and per moment of a delightful dinner, a delightful lunch, it's beef that if you can cut back on, you can reduce your climate footprint the most.
Was there something about this study and your research on this that surprised you?
So the big surprise is that there really is no relationship between prices and healthfulness. So everyone wants health for themselves, for their children, for their family. And we go to the store looking for health and we choose items that we think are healthy. Everyone, quote, knows what's healthy. But it turns out we can't buy it, partly because we're perhaps have aspirations for health that are shaped by marketing that's influencing us to think that certain things are healthy and they're not actually going to make a difference to your health. Um, they may make a difference to you because of a placebo effect, right? Where you believe it's going to be helpful. And so you act on that belief and you do actually get outdoors, do some exercise and feel better, about yourself. And that makes a huge difference to your mood, to your well-being, and to your health. But that's a placebo effect, not the actual effect of the food. And so people don't buy food that's actually healthier. And what's surprising is that these premium products that claim healthfulness just really aren't healthier on average. And these low cost items that are just generic, just the absolute store brand, bulk packaged thing is actually super healthy.
Can you give me an example of those things that you found that claim to be super healthy but really aren't?
By far the biggest category of food that people buy in pursuit of health and also in pursuit of sustainability is the organic certification that the United States Department of Agriculture provides, and that governments around the world also provide. So organic products do have less residues of chemicals applied to them. They also do have slight differences in the composition of the item, where if a food is grown without pesticides, sometimes vegetables, fruits will have more phytochemicals of certain kinds because they've had more pest attacks. And so they've responded to those pest attacks and some of the chemicals in food. So there are some slight differences in terms of your health. There's also some big differences in terms of the environment. If you live next to an organic farm, you're not going to have the pesticide drift that we get from dicamba that's recently been more approved for use in American agriculture than it had been before restrictions lifted against dicamba. So, but also other crop chemicals. If you're going to live next to a farm, it's a lot nicer if it's next to an organic farm. The only difference of the organic product is that it's more expensive because it uses more resources. That includes more land because there's less yield per unit of land. And on the health side, when you think about those differences, they are none of them the factors that drive ill health in America. So the organic standard is something that people see is endorsed by the federal government. They know they want healthfulness. They know they want sustainability often. You can think, well, I'll just buy that. And that'll be a shorthand for an overall healthy diet. And it really isn't. And this is something that I and many of my colleagues, recognize, we understand, but we're very hesitant to talk about because there are so millions and millions of people who've invested so heavily in this idea that if we could have an alternative system that was following the organic standard, that the world as a whole would be better off. We would be healthier as families, as a population, and more sustainable. And sadly, the organic standard was written in the 1990s based on ideas from the 70s and 80s, and it hasn't turned out to be a source of great improvements in sustainability, except regarding the neighborhood. So if you're going to live next to a farm, you should live next to an organic farm. But the health issues, as well as the sustainability issues, turn out to be elsewhere.
If someone wanted to make a small change to their diet, and both for their health and for the planet, what would you recommend?
Improving your diet starts with knowing what you're eating now. And different people have very different baseline diets, different usual diets. And so the most important thing is to take stock of what you're eating. The basic dietary guidelines for Americans represents scientific consensus built up since the 1970s in successive waves. The most recent one alters the image, the food guide, the icon. The up-down pyramid is basically a meme. First of all, because nobody really cared about the pyramid before. We'd retired the pyramid more than 15 years ago in favor of the My Plate, which is a stylized image, looks like a plate. It shows roughly proportional to how much food is a healthy diet. It's about half the plate is fruits and vegetables. If you were to sort of put stuff on a plate or on a cafeteria tray, you'd want, roughly half of it, or on your kitchen counter, half of it should be fruits and vegetables. Then about a quarter would be some kind of grain, starchy staple, potatoes, bread, so forth. Another quarter would be things we'd call protein foods, which could be beans, garbanzo beans, that sort of thing. Could be the sardines you mentioned. Could be other kinds, an omelet, that sort of thing. And so roughly half fruits and vegetables, half your rice and beans or other kinds of protein combined with starchy staples. In the US, My Plate, there's also a glass of milk, which can be very helpful, or cheese, that sort of thing. Other countries don't have that, but that food guide is similar to other countries. And so that's an overall balanced, healthy diet. Within those food groups, you would want the starchy staples to have more whole grains than refined grains. So if a majority can be whole rather than refined, that will be very helpful. And then overall, to limit the added sodium and limit the added sugar, that's a healthy diet.
Why is it important for research to study the connection between nutrition, cost, and climate change?
It's important to study how products in the grocery store and in restaurants have attributes that are good for health, or perhaps harmful for health, and are good for the environment, for our neighbors, for other people, or perhaps harmful to them. And especially connect that to product prices, because we care a lot about whether people can afford a healthy diet, whether people who want health and might also care about their neighbors and about the environment can even obtain that, because we don't have an X-ray vision that shows that when we go into the store. And we're bombarded by messages. The advertising the marketing, the influencer culture that's on social media. And it's very easy to forget some of the basic home truths that we know from kind of common sense. And it's also impossible to know some of the more advanced scientific discoveries that we've made recently. So it's important to study that in order to know what's really true behind the messaging from marketers and influencers. Really hard to know that. And that's what we try to study with the kind of funding I've been able to get from philanthropic donors, from governments around the world, and through the magic that is an independent university, where we're funded primarily by student tuition, where families are saving and scrimping over decades to send their kids to college and to graduate school so that they will learn what's true in the world. And we have the privilege of being employed to try to find that out.
And if listeners were to remember just one thing from your research, what would you like that to be?
That a balanced diet is a really simple idea. It's half your plate is fruit and vegetables. It's the other half is rice and beans or chapati and dal or pounded yam and peanut stew if you're from West Africa. For thousands of years, people have done trial and error and discovered all of the amazing fruits and vegetables that we now get access to year-round in supermarkets. And all of the different kinds of grains, potatoes, roots of all kinds, plantain bananas even, that are the starchy staples. And then all the kinds of animal source foods, the cheese, the fish, from canned tuna and canned sardines to all sorts of things. Turns out there's one thing about food that we do have pretty accurate biological feedback about. So for most aspects of food, your cravings don't really drive you to healthier things. And but there is one aspect of your diet that biological feedback works really well for. And that is calories, because you will feel hungry if you don't get enough, and you will notice if you get too much. You'll notice if your belly grows, if your pants don't fit, and if you start getting too little, you'll feel that hunger. Many Americans, I think, have never felt hunger because they've been able to snack and always eat out of habit, and basically never experience what it feels like. But everyone has experienced, episodes of weight gain. And the question is, do you stop that? As soon as you begin to feel that your pants are tight, are you able to cut back? So calories turn out to be the one aspect of nutrition that people do get real direct feedback about. You don't need to count them to have an energy balanced diet. People have had an energy balanced diet without weight gain or loss for tens of thousands of years without knowing that energy is in food. And then after energy was discovered to be the thing that's in food that keeps people alive, we get energy balance without counting calories. The other things, though, that's what you need to count. One really interesting thing is the difference between what we learned through this project called Food Prices for Nutrition and how people think about food insecurity or challenges in just obtaining one's usual diet. So on the podcast, there's a fantastic episode, highly recommended, with my colleague Park Wilde, who studies this question of food security and hunger as it's measured, or used to be measured, by the United States government before they stopped measuring it, and it's measured around the world. And that's asking people, can they get their usual diet? What we're doing now is to ask, in foods, what is there that people would actually need for their health, and how much does that cost? So there's an interesting contrast between my project, Food Prices for Nutrition, which is about, are we getting our money's worth from our usual diet, and the question of food security, which is, can people get their usual diet at all?
Thank you so much, Professor Masters. I really appreciate hearing about your work, and I have definitely learned a lot just talking with you in this very short period of time.
Curious by Nature is a production of Newswise. More than 7,000 journalists get the Newswise wires. Visit newswise.com and find out how to spread your news today.